Alright, welcome to another Cinema 4D tutorial for CG Tuts. This is going to be broken up into two parts, the modeling and unwrapping part and the texturing. This is the modeling and unwrapping. We're going to model a Japanese Type 97 grenade from World War II, and then we're going to unwrap it, and the next video will show how we texture it inside of Photoshop. If you haven't already, create a new document, and I want to bring a reference image in. So middle mouse click and go into the front viewport and go to Mode, View Settings. It'll default to Display, so you're going to want to click on the Back tab and select the Type 97 grenade. It'll be in the reference folder, which is going to be in the archive. So select it. And when I first got the image, it was pretty much lined up, so I didn't have to go into Photoshop and edit it so that it would be easier to use blueprint for our model. You'll notice that since it was taken with a camera, it's not perfectly orthographic, so we're gonna get a little bit of curve at the top and bottom, even though both of those parts of the grenade are flat. So to create a lathe object, first we have to have a spline. We're gonna be making a linear spline, then adding the curves that we need afterwards. So click the Add Spline Object icon, or go to Objects, Create Spline, Linear. The first point that we're going to make is we're going to want to make it as close as possible to the center of the scene. Don't worry about being perfect just yet, because we're going to edit it once we're done with the spline. So just go through the image, and if the gizmo gets in the way, just press Alt D to hide it for now, and just go through the image, making sure that you're getting the right profile. For now, we're not going to actually do the outline of the ridges. We're going to add those in later. So once you do that point, scroll all the way to the bottom, hold down middle mouse button. Hold down Alt and use the middle mouse button to move down to the bottom of the image and add a point at the bottom, and then just go through and add the rest of the points. Although this part looks curved, using the reference image, you can see that it's actually flat. So create a horizontal line, and then a vertical, and then another horizontal, and then add a point at the bottom. And using the curve, we're going to estimate that the bottom of the grenade is actually right there. Alright, before we actually create our lathe object, we're going to have to edit our spline and make sure everything is nice and clean. First off, these 2 points right here have to have an X position of 0, so select the top point, highlight its X position, and just press delete and enter, and it'll default to 0. Do the same to the bottom point. Also, we want the top and bottom to be flat, so we need to take the Y position of this first point and paste it into this point so that we have a flat edge. This edge over here is also flat, so take that point's X position, copy and paste it into the next point, and press enter. Oops, looks like we didn't get it. X, Control C, and then paste it in. Okay, actually the reference image is actually getting in the way a little bit, so go to Mode, View Settings, and uncheck Show Picture so that we can work on the spline alone. This portion right here also has to be flat, so select this first point over here, grab its Y position, and paste it into the next point, and then grab that point's X position and paste it into the point directly underneath it so that we get a nice 90-degree angle over there. This face also has to be flat, so grab the X position of this point and paste it into that point. Alright, and then we're just going to go do the same for the rest of the spline. Grab the Y position of this point, then the X position, and then the Y position, and then finally we grab the Y position of this last point and paste it into that point. Now if you switch the reference image back on, you'll notice that this face right here isn't actually flat, it actually curves into there. Also, we're probably going to want to move this point down a little bit, so press Alt-D to bring back the gizmo and move it down a little bit. And to curve this point, all we have to do is select that point and add soft, right click, select the point, right click. Actually, if we were going to do that, it would actually, sometimes Cinema 4D creates a uneven surface when we add the lathe object, so the better technique would be to actually just add a point. So make sure you have the spline selected, right click, add point, add a point there, and then just move the point outwards. And then chamfer it. What I did there was make sure I had this point selected, right click, select chamfer, and then just drag out. To make the point more curved. Alright. So, now all we have to do is add the spline to a lathe NURBS object. So just hold and click on the hybrid NURBS icon, and then click on the lathe NURBS object, and then just drag the spline underneath it. And looking at it, it seems like we've got a good profile. We've got the curve, and looking at the reference image, I just want to pull those points in a little bit. They don't seem to jut outwards as much. It's always good to have more than one reference image. So move it in a little bit. And the edges do look jagged, but we can just fix that by turning the subdivisions up. 40 should be good. To check the number of polygons we have in the scene before we make it editable, just select it, go to Objects, Object Information, and poly right there. It's only 640, so we're keeping it on budget. And you'll notice we haven't added the ridges yet, so let's go back into the front view. And what we're going to do is cut some points in so that when we pull them out, it actually creates the horizontal ridges, so it'll be easier to add the vertical ridges with a bool object. So zoom in, select the spline object, and select your knife tool. Just right click, select your knife tool when you're in the point mode, and start adding points. Make sure to add a point at the very bottom right there, because when we pull this point out that we're about to add, we don't want the ridge to go over there. You'll see there's a little lip over there. So continue to add the points. I'm holding down shift to keep the knife straight. Remember to add 2 points between the ridges. And just continue to add points. That one was a little low actually, until you get to the bottom of the grenade. and make sure you add a point over here. Just like at the top, we don't want the ridge to go from that point up. We want to have a point there, so the ridge has something, there's a little bit of space here. So now we need to select these points on all the ridges. So holding down shift, start to select them. Make sure you have all the points selected. Okay, and then just zoom in to get as close as possible, and then just move the points out. And when you zoom out, you can see we've created ridges. So just go back into the perspective view and you'll see that we've added the horizontal ridges. At this point, the basic grenade body is done, and now we're gonna switch to the bool modeling. So to add the horizontal ridges, what we're gonna do is we're going to create a cube, and we're gonna position it so that it slices into the object, and when we add it into the bool object, it'll subtract the cube from the actual basic grenade body. So middle mouse click to switch to the top view, rotate the cube 45 degrees, holding down shift quantizes the rotation, so we're at 45 degrees. Switch to the model tool, 45 degrees. Make the cube editable by pressing C, and then switch to the object axis tool and delete the rotation so that we have a regular axis that's not rotated. Switch back to the model tool, press E to use the move tool, and move it out. At this point, it's easier to switch to the front view, and I'm going to shut off the reference image because we don't need it right now, and we're just going to position the cube in the center and then start to scale it up. And it's always good to zoom in to make sure that the edge of the cube isn't cutting into anything but the ridges, so that's close enough. Also, we don't want the bottom of the cube to cut into that edge, and the top of the cube actually isn't going as high as we want. So switch to the top view, switch to polygon mode, select the top polygon, and just move it up, making sure that it's not cutting into that top ridge. Okay, so we've got the basic position, but if you look at the reference image, there's actually more than one cut. There's actually 12, so we need to duplicate it. To do that, we're gonna use an array object. So switch to the object axis tool and delete the X position. You'll see why we do that once we add the array object. So hold down on the array object icon, or you could just click to create an array object, and drag the cube into the array object. The reason why we move the cube's object axis to the center of the grenade is so that when we go into the array object's object properties, we can make the radius 0, and all of a sudden we've got all of the cubes perfectly rotated around the grenade. But before we add the rest of the cubes, right now there's only 8 when we need 12. We need to position it vertically. So make sure you have the cube object selected and move it down, and again make sure it's not cutting into the top or bottom ridge of the grenade. Okay, just barely getting past that last ridge. And switch to the top view and just make it 11 copies, so that we have the 11 copies plus the original cube giving us 12 cuts. Alright, so we've got them in position, and now it's time to cut them out. The way a bool object works is by reading what's in its hierarchy. The top object is the A object, and the bottom object is the B object. The bool object will subtract B from A, or add A and B, depending on what you have it set to. So we're going to want to move the cubes to the bottom so that they're B. To create the bool object, all we have to do is, again, hold and click on the array object icon, and click bool, and then drag the objects underneath it, and it subtracted the cubes from the grenade. Actually, bool objects have a lot of settings. You can set it to A union, so it actually creates points to add the objects together. A without B, which just subtracts it without adding polygons. But we want it to be on A subtract B, so that it subtracts B from A and also adds the polygons to create a single closed object. Alright, so we're halfway there with the bool modeling. Looking at the reference image, there's actually insets on the top of it, and they seem to go on every single ridge, so that means that there's 12 of them. To create that, we're also going to need to bool them out. So create another object, click on the cube, and create a pyramid object. Move it up outside of the grenade, and we want it to be upside down, so change the orientation to -y, or you could have kept it +y and just rotated it 180 degrees. Alright, so switching to the top view, we want to position it and size it up, so press T and size it down to a more appropriate size. That's a little bit bigger. And don't forget that there's also a point going down, so switch to the right or front view, doesn't matter, and move that point down, and then move it down so that it just barely sits inside our grenade. Just barely. Alright. Actually want to size it up a little bit. And just like we did with the cube, we're going to rotate it 45 degrees on the top axis. Make it editable by pressing C. Switch to the object axis tool and remove the rotation from the axis. And then press E and move it out. And then we're going to select the point tool, and we're going to select this point right here on the pyramid and just move it out. And it's a little hard to see actually, so select the pyramid object and in the basic properties set use color to automatic and make it red or green, something bright that we can see against a grenade. And it's a little wide right now, so scale it down on the Z axis. And just like we did with the cube, switch to the object axis tool and get rid of the X position. So now when we create our array and put the pyramid inside it, we can set the radius to 0 and have them all rotated. So actually we need to move them up, so switch to a side view and move them up. Also we need to increase the no, actually I think it is 7 insets, so we can keep it at 8, so 7 copies plus the pyramid, so 8 should be good. And drag it underneath the bool object. Right now it's a good idea to get organized, so rename our lathe object grenade. Rename our first array vertical insets. And our last array top insets. Okay. So our bool object is reading this is A and this is B. There's no idea what this is. It doesn't actually read anything past A or B. So to make both of these objects B, just select both of them and press Alt-G to put them in a null object, and right away you can see the bool object removing the top insets along with the vertical insets. Alright, so our basic grenade body is done, and now we need to model the fuse and fuse cap. Also, it'd be a good idea to also model the pin. So switch to the right view. We're going to bring in another reference image, so go to mode, view settings, and this time the reference image is fuse 1. Now I could have gone into Photoshop and rotated the image, made it a little bit easier on us, but we can do all of that in Cinema 4D. So rotate the image 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees, and then increase the X offset. Also the Y offset. Until we get it as close as possible to the center. Alright, we don't have to worry about scale right now, because once we're done, we're going to use our other reference image to get the scale right. Right now all we're worrying about is shape. So we've got our reference image down, and we're going to need to, just like we did with the grenade body, trace out the profile and then lathe it out. So to do that, we're going to create another spline object by selecting linear spline object, and this time I'm going to use the left side. So create a point in the center and then go through and create the points. Alright. Since we're in the right view, instead of making sure the X position of our endpoints is at 0, we need to make sure our Z position is at 0. So select the top point, make it Z position 0, and select the last point and also make it Z position 0. Alright, the top is flat, so select this point, copy its Y position, and paste it into the next point. to create the curve over here, we're going to add a point, press Alt-D to bring the gizmo back if you hit it while you were drawing it, and press E to use the move tool. Move it over, and then chamfer it. We could do it by hand using a Bezier, but that would affect the next point, and it would make this point seem less hard-edged, even if we move the Bezier point all the way to the center. Alright, this face is also flat, so select this point and copy its Z position, paste it, copy the same point's Y position, and paste it into our last point. Like we did with the grenade, we're going to create a lathe object and just drag it in. Alright, so switch to the front view now and scale our cap up. Actually, before you scale, switch to the object axis tool and move it to the bottom so that we scale uniformly from the bottom of the fuse. So switch to object again, press T to switch to scale, and scale it up. Alright, we've got the width, but now we need to get the height. So select the spline object. It's probably a good idea to hide our second reference image, and select all of these points right here and move them up. And actually it seems like the little inset we created is a little too high, so deselect these top 2 points and move the inset down until it's lined up with the reference image. Alright. Alright. It's looking much better. And up to scale. The insets are moved in a little bit too much. So switch back to the top view. Expand the null object. And as long as we're in point view, just select all the points and move them out. There we go. Let's name this fuse. We also need to create the fuse cap and the pin. So the fuse cap is actually pretty easy. All we have to do is switch to the right view, duplicate the fuse, just hold down Control and drag, name this fuse cap, and all we have to do is select the spline, whoops, delete this point here, select the spline, move this point up, not that far up, right there, and we want to create a little ridge so people can see that it's the cap. So switch back to your knife tool and create 2 cuts like that. Select the 2 bottommost points, zoom in and press E to switch to move, and just position them to create a cap. We can actually just select this point, copy its Y position, and paste it there. Alright. Looking pretty good, but we want to add some thickness to it. so. I actually want to make this a little bit bigger. Move that down and right click. You can have all the points selected or none of the points, and select create outline and just drag out. Get your outline. Alright, looking pretty good. On the reference image there's a little hole at the top of the cap, so just switch back to the right view and select the topmost points and just move them in until we've got a nice hole. There we go. Alright. Next up is creating the pin, which is actually really easy. Just switch to the top view. And this time, instead of creating a linear spline, we're going to create a Bezier spline. So click and drag. As you drag out, you'll notice that it's creating two handles. The first handle edits this first spline, and the next handle helps edit the next spline. So as you're creating, keep that in mind. Create a point. And actually I want to move that point up and create it like this instead. Alright. So move it up. So we've got the pin, but we want to give it some thickness. So create a circle object. Move that up so we can move that up and out so we can see it, and reduce the radius. Something a little bit more suitable. 9 should be good. And we're going to use the circle to draw a path connected to the spline object. To do that, we need one more object, a sweep NURBS object. So click and drag on the hyperNURBS object, sweep NURBS, and drag both the circle and spline underneath, keeping in mind that the circle has to be on top. And you'll see the circle intersecting on itself. So all we have to do is switch to the spline tool, points, switch to points tool, select one of the points, and move them up until it looks like it was twisted on top of itself. Alright, that's well and good, but it looks like the pin is just traveling right through the cap. So we need to bool out the path of the spline going through the cap. To do that, all we have to do is duplicate this, name this pin, and duplicate it beneath the fuse cap. And for now, just hide the original pins object. You can double click that point right there, or select the pin object, go to basic, visible in editor, and switch it to off. And create another bool object. Drag the fuse cap and the duplicate pin into there, and we want to increase the radius of that. So if we bring our pin object back. You can see that it doesn't look like it did anything. All we have to do is increase the radius of the circle. So select the circle, go to Objects, and start to increase the radius. And you'll start to notice it creating a larger hole. I'm actually going to give it a radius of 16. And we also forgot to turn the subdivisions on the fuse cap and fuse up, so just turn them up to 28 should be good. Check our polygon count. Alright, and that's it. We've modeled out the Type 97 Japanese grenade. We're done with the modeling again, so now we're going to unwrap the model. I've only made a few minor changes to the model, but it'll all be in the project file so you can follow along. Just open it up, unwrapped finished, or actually unwrap start is going to be the name of the file, and we'll get started. So to unwrap our objects, we're going to need to actually make them all editable. So select all of them in the Objects panel and press C to make them editable. And you'll notice that three of our objects are in hierarchies. So to connect all of them, we can just right-click, unfold all, and start selecting the objects in the hierarchies and connecting them. Select the top object in the body hierarchy and shift-click the bottom one, and right up here hit Objects and Connect, and then we can delete this hierarchy. And same with the pin, Objects, Connect, and same with the fuse cap. Alright, to unwrap our models we're going to be using bodypaint. So go to Window, Layout, bodypaint UV Edit to open up that layout. And we're going to be using the paint setup wizard, and then we're going to get rid of the default UV unwrapping that it does and unwrap it ourselves, and then we'll pop into Photoshop and texture it in there. Alright, so click on the paint setup wizard button, and first we have to decide what we're going to unwrap. We know we're going to unwrap the grenade object because that's our most complex object, and we can't simply put a default map on it and expect it to look nice. We also know we're going to be unwrapping the fuse object and the fuse cap object. For the pin object, it's actually a really simple object, so we don't actually need to unwrap it. So just deselect it and hit next. And now we're going to recalculate the UV. You can actually uncheck that, but I want to show you what the optimal cubic mapping looks like, and then we're going to get rid of it and map it ourselves. Also make sure that single material mode is unchecked because we don't want them sharing the same Photoshop document. So once you have it set up like that, press next, and we want it to create the missing materials, rescale existing textures even though there aren't any, and create or delete channels. Right now we're only going to create a color channel because we can duplicate the PSD to make our reflection and bump maps. We also want the width and height to be 1024 by 1024, so change the minimum width and height to 1024. And then hit next. And you can see it's already gone ahead and created our materials. So once that's done, hit close, and we'll get started with unwrapping. First we want to see what our mesh looks like right now, so select UV mesh, show UV mesh, and the mesh for the grenade is actually pretty confusing. The reason why it's unwrapped like this is because with the paint setup wizard it expects us to paint actually within body paint, but that's not what we're going to be doing with this tutorial. I want Photoshop. So to get rid of this default mapping, go to mapping, projection, and hit cylinder projection. It looks like it's done a pretty good job of mapping it out nice and flat, but if you look when we select a bottom polygon, all our bottom polygons, you can see that they're flat, and if we were to paint it in Photoshop, this edge right here would be stretched across all of these polygons. So to fix that, select that polygon, and we want to save the selection, so go to selection, set selection, and just name it bottom, and then for projection hit cubic, and then just press E and you can move that to the side. Now the top is going to be a little bit more confusing. First, let's hide the rest of the object so we're not confused. So switch to the polygon selection tool and just select all of the top polygons. You can actually switch to the top view if you want to make sure, and just holding down shift, I'm going to select all of the polygons. Alright, making sure that we have all the polygons selected. And once you're sure you have all the polygons selected, deselect this polygon selection tag and go to selection, set a new selection, and name this one top. And instead of using cubic mapping, because it'll leave those polygons outside, we can actually just use shrink mapping, and it'll flatten out these indents. And then we can just press E, move it over, and press T, and scale it up. Alright, it's looking pretty good, but our top and bottom polygons are outside of our texture, so just to make sure they fit, hit Fit Canvas to UV, and it's resized our texture. The main body is in that 1024 by 1024 box that we created earlier, and the rest of the polygons have been moved in. I actually want to move that in. So the benefit of using a polygon selection is to just hit restore selection on the tag and then just move it over. Alright. Just do a little bit of cleaning up here. Alright, so we're done unwrapping our main body object. So let's go ahead and move to the fuse cap object. I'm going to go ahead and hide the grenade object just so we can work on the fuse cap alone. So select it, and just like with the grenade, it had cubic mapping done on it, and it's not the best if we want to be working in Photoshop. So select all the polygons and hit sphere mapping. You might have thought that cylinder mapping would be nice, but just like with the grenade, if we select, the polygons are flat. So we're going to be using sphere mapping, and then we're going to scale it. But if you just do normal scaling, you can see it's scaling uniformly. When we want it to be a little bit more like a square, so click and hold on the scale button and hit non-uniform scale. And this time we're going to scale it up, and just to be sure that all the polygons are in the canvas, we're just going to again hit the Fit Canvas to UV button. Alright, that was much easier than the grenade, and this is going to be even easier. We can actually just use cylinder mapping on this one. Or actually, no, we can't. Let's try some sphere mapping, just like we did with the fuse cap. Select these polygons. I want them to be circles, just like on the grenade. So, hit cubic mapping and move it to the side. You might want to scale it down. Select the bottom polygons and do the same. And then hit Fit Canvas to UV. Alright. So we've prepared all our UVs for Photoshop, and now what we're going to do is render out a ambient occlusion mask so that we can kind of get a sense of where everything is when we're painting in Photoshop. So switch back to the startup layout. Just go to Window, Layout, Startup Layout, and select the grenade, fuse cap, and fuse objects. And then go to Render, Render Texture. Alright. It's a good idea to bring all our objects back at this point. So the first one we're going to work on is the grenade object. Be sure to change the width and height to the width and height of our texture that we created. (1527) by 1024. And then for the fuse cap, it's right there. 1035 by 990. And then for the fuse, 1320 by 572. Alright. And then using Shift and Control, select these three tags, go to Options, and hit Ambient Occlusion. And then we'll work with the grenade tag by itself. Alright, I want to render this ambient occlusion map in the folders that we're going to create for each object. First, I'm going to create a folder for the grenade, then the fuse, and the fuse cap. So go back into the grenade and save grenade. It'll add the ambient occlusion suffix to the end of it. Whoops, accidentally selected. Make sure it's on PSD. And once we're sure we have everything that we want, make sure that optimal mapping is off so that it doesn't remap our UVs, and then hit Bake. Okay, as that's rendering out, I'm going to show you guys how to add a UV grid to our materials so that we can see what we're doing in Photoshop. Go to Layout, and go back to BP UV Edit, select the grenade, and go to Layer, Create UV Mesh Layer. Go to Layer, Outline Polygons, and that's a little thick. So go to brushes, and change the size to something like 5. And then go to layer, outline polygons again. It's a lot thinner now. And then do the same with the fuse cap and the fuse. Alright. And it's still rendering out that texture. Once we render out, you can see that it's created a nice grid, so that when we're in Photoshop we can see what we're doing. Go back to the startup layout and let's check on that texture. Alright, it's done. And do the same for the fuse and fuse cap. Alright, I'm gonna pause the recording at this point, and I'm gonna first save out the textures. So go back to BP UV Edit, go to Save Texture As, Photoshop.PSD, Texture, and what is that? Grenade color. Save it. Go to the fuse cap, Save Texture As, Photoshop.PSD, fuse cap color, and the same for the fuse. Alright, that's the end of part 1, the modeling and unwrapping. The next part will be texturing inside of Photoshop. If you have any questions between the next video, just email me or leave a comment. I'll try and help you out as soon as I can.